lives doing as you please, telling your little white lies, thinking it's okay not to cross your T's and dot your I's. I'm not surprised if you said that no one would, but guess what? God does, and he does it just because. No rhyme, no reason, any millennium, any season. He's pledged his allegiance by the Son of his only begotten, so easily forgotten since we've been spoiled rotten. By his grace and his mercy, we run far away until we get thirsty. Then we run right back because we know that well, it never runs dry. He never would deny you the opportunity to come back home because you are his very own. Over 7 billion people on this planet, and he knows each one of us by name. And when you show up unannounced, guess what? He's still happy that you came. Thank you, Jesus, that God is not like man, because if he was, he would close the door and lock it, only let those in who have deep enough pockets. And when we turn our backs, he sits and he waits. Even when we think he's gone, he's still standing by the gates, waiting on you and all and any that will come. Even though there are billions, you are very special to the one that created all things, special to the one who wipes all slates clean. It doesn't matter how long you've been away, his love is the same as it was yesterday. Come home.
Thank you, praise team, very much. And Sonia, thank you very much for that wonderful, wonderful spoken word that she wrote for this talk today. That was beautiful. The words were perfect, perfect. Y'all, we're going to talk today about my favorite of the parables. It is probably the one that is most familiar to all of us, and yet there is a well that most of us have never dug deep enough into. This week was just a wonderful week for me, just seeing things that I had never seen before. And I want to set it up. It's in Luke chapter 15, and I've got the scripture on your outline, and I didn't give you any points, and there might be a couple of times I'm going to say I want you to write something down, and when you do, the lights will come up and you'll be able to write it down. But for the most part, I want you to just to focus in on what I'm going to talk to you today about. This is an interesting parable in that it deals with one particular situation Jesus is wanting to address, and he's going to tell 3 different stories to hammer home the point that he wants people to understand. Normally, if he wants to get a point across, he tells a story. Occasionally, he will tell 2 stories, but this time, in this particular setting, he tells 3 stories. The third is the biggest of them all, that really gives people an idea of what Jesus is all about and what God is all about. I'm going to begin reading because I want to set it up and kind of give you just a little bit of what's going on in the first 2 stories. We're going to spend most of our time on the third story. You're going to get some things today. You're going to learn some things, be very helpful. So let's look on the screen. This is Luke chapter 15. This is kind of the background, how the story begins. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, implied hear Jesus teach. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, I like that word, muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and he eats with them." Now, quickly, there are 3 groups of people I want you to notice. There is Jesus there, and then there are the people who are kind of the obvious sinner types. Then there are the Pharisees or the teachers of the law, the religious leaders. And if you read the verbs, it kind of tells the story. Jesus is teaching, the sinners are gathering, and the Pharisees are muttering. That's what's kind of going on behind the scenes. Now, the word mutter is interesting. It's a word that's only used twice in the New Testament, and it talks about kind of the undercurrent of discontent or complaining that is not spoken to the person that you're really upset with. It's kind of that little gossipy that kind of goes on behind the scenes. Nobody has the courage directly to speak to the person with whom they are frustrated, but they talk among themselves in such a way to try to incite a riot. You know what I'm talking about? That's what that word muttering means. And here's what they are complaining about. This is what the religious people are complaining about. They are complaining that Jesus, if he is some godly teacher, he would know what kind of people were around him, and he shouldn't be around those people. He shouldn't even touch those people with a 10-foot pole. That's what the religious leaders are thinking. In our day, they would say, well, look who he is with. He is with the drug addicts, and he's with the people that are thieves, and he's with the people that are embezzlers of money. He's with all these people. That's what they would say in those days. It was, he's with sinners. And not only is he touching them, he is welcoming them, and he is eating with them. Look at verse 2 again. It says, this man, notice that, they can't even bring themselves to say Jesus. This man, he welcomes sinners, and he eats with them. Again, Jesus is choosing some wonderful words when he says, welcome sinners and eats with them, or when Luke writes this and he's describing the event and says, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. That means in the original language, he was accepting these people as friends. He was eating a meal with them, which in that culture was sharing with somebody at the deepest level. Let's come up with the lights just a little bit, and you write this down because this is important. Basically, this is what is taking place. Jesus was building a spiritual community. Joey, let's come a little bit of the light. Jesus was building a spiritual community, a faith-based community, and those on the outside were now on the inside. Write that somewhere because that is the most profound of thoughts. The man who said he was God's son, sent to save the world, was building a spiritual community where those on the outside are now on the inside. That's what's taking place. And it's making the Pharisees furious because what they had been doing is they were building walls up between what they thought was God and the people. They were building these elaborate walls, and then here Jesus comes and says, I'm a bridge that's going to bring these people to God. This is a very tense and very explosive, in-your-face kind of a situation that's taking place. Jesus teaching, sinners hanging around him, and the Pharisees so irate, so irate. So you wonder, what's Jesus going to do? What is he going to do? Is he going to be a little apologetic and say, hey guys, maybe I've oversold it a little bit. Maybe I have stepped a little bit too fast and maybe we need to pull it back. Is that going to be his approach? Maybe he's going to try to mend some fences or build some bridges. Maybe he'll back off just a little bit, being a friend to sinners. I mean, you don't want to lose all the religious crowd, do you? But what Jesus does in this scenario is he tells these three stories. Let's look at the first one, Luke 15:4. Jesus says, if a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go and search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he finds it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. And when he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. Jesus says, in the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away yet. And then he begins the second story in verse 8. Or, suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and she loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, will she not call her friends and neighbors and say, rejoice with me because I have found my lost coin? In the same way, there's joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. Now, everybody sitting around, they know the meaning of these stories. Jesus is being a little bit provocative for sure, somewhat confrontational, that's true. But the sinner that's sitting there hears these stories and they say, that's me. That's me. I'm the lost sheep. Or that's me. I'm the lost coin. Jesus comes and he reaches out to me and I matter. I'm worth something to God. I didn't know I was worth something to God. The lost sinner gets it. Jesus uses these two images, the lost sheep, the lost coin, side by side, and the similarity in the two stories is really quite remarkable. I'll give them to you quickly. Both things lost had incredible value to the person who lost them. A sheep was a very valuable commodity. The lost coin was very, very valuable. So this implies that people are very valuable. Secondly, in the story, Jesus tells that there was a great price to be paid by the person who rescues those lost items. The shepherd looks far and all over the place to try to find that lost sheep. The woman searches the house all day and all night to try to find the lost coin. And the third part of these stories is this: there's unspeakable joy when they found what was lost. And Jesus is saying God is like that. Jesus, for his part, is clearly claiming that he's the one doing the searching. They're mad at him for hanging out with sinners, and he says, you know what? I'm in the scenario. This is God, and I'm the one that's out here connecting with the lost people. I'm the one. Jesus is saying very clearly, this is me. The people who are sinners sitting around are saying, hey, we're in the story too. And so Jesus is building it up, building it up, building it up. But now he's about to shift into another gear. And this is where it gets very interesting. Verse 11. To illustrate this point further, Jesus told them a story. A man had 2 sons. Now, automatically, all of the listeners would have realized what was happening. This isn't a sheep thing, and this isn't a coin thing. This is a human being thing. A son is at stake. They all kind of perk their ears up. What's he going to say? Now, we have termed this particular story the story of the prodigal son. Can I tell you something? That is not in the Scriptures. It's not defined as the story of the prodigal son. That's something that we have called it. But the truth is that's not a good naming of this event. There is a prodigal son. There is an older brother we're going to talk about. This is really a story about a wonderful, grace-giving, amazing father that is Jesus' picture of what God is like for all of us. Verse 12. In this story where there's 2 sons, the younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now, before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. Now we've got to stop here just a moment. Jesus begins by telling this part of the story, what the young son does. He goes to his father and he says, give me my share of the estate. As the younger son, he would have been entitled to 1/3 of his father's estate. The older brother would get 2/3. The younger brother would get 1/3. But let's think about this just a moment. You know the story of the Good Samaritan? Jesus tells the story and he says a man fell among thieves, and he says first a religious leader comes by, a priest, and the priest avoids him, and then a Levite comes by and he avoids the man who's hurting. And everybody in the audience thinks that the next person who comes by is just going to be a normal Jew who saves the day. And Jesus doesn't say a normal Jew. Jesus says, and then a Samaritan comes by who was the most hated people in that day. And it kind of surprised everybody. This has kind of that same deal. They're listening to this story of 2 sons, and then he says the son asked the father for his inheritance right now. And all of a sudden the people are like, you're kidding me. That was a curve. They were not expecting that. Ken Bailey, who writes a lot about the parables, talks about this, and he says if you go to any Middle Eastern village right now, he said it hasn't changed in 2,000 years, you go right now to any Middle Eastern village and you ask any of the villagers what the father's response would be to the request to a son saying, I want my inheritance right now, and Bailey says they will all agree 100%. It would be anger to the degree that there would probably be physical and verbal blows assaulted on the son, and there would be a disinheriting of the boy right then and there. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a son saying, oh man, I'm tired of waiting around for you to die, so let's just pretend like you're dead right now and give me what's mine. That's the story. And Jesus goes on to say not many days after that request, the son was able to take his inheritance and he was able to leave. Why did it take time? Because the father had to liquidate part of the estate. He didn't just have a bank with 1/3 of the money sitting in the bank. You understand, he had to sell cattle. He had to sell parts of his land. He had to begin to liquidate because this self-centered boy says, Dad, I'm sick of being here. Give me what is rightfully mine. So the dad begins to liquidate his assets, to sell off his possessions, to sell off his livestock. And while this is going on, guess what? Every member in town knows exactly what is happening. They're watching. And they are talking about that bad, bad boy. They're saying things like, we knew when he was just a teenager he was going to be no account. We knew, we saw it. And they were gossiping about him, and they couldn't believe what this poor dad was having to do. This is unprecedented. So for several days, this is such a weighty deal, and I guess the father is wondering, while he's liquidating all of his assets, will my boy come to his senses? Will he change his mind? Will I get him back? But he won't. The day cannot come soon enough for this boy. When the cashier's check is ready, he walks out of the gates. He shakes the dust of that little town off of his feet, and he cannot leave fast enough, and he never looks back. Now, to the audience that is listening, it would be utterly unthinkable that a son, while his father was alive, would ever come and ask for his share of the estate. It would never be done. This would have been perceived as the most hurtful event that could have possibly happened in the life of the father. It would have been offensive, humiliating, disrespectful to the point of being like mutiny. And in a radical contradiction to the most venerable traditions of that time, would have shown a deep disrespect to the point that it was tantamount to him saying, "I wish, old man, you were dead." He doesn't just break the law. He breaks the relationship with his father, and he breaks the old man's heart. Verse 13. A few days later, this young son packed all of his belongings and he moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all of his money in wild living. He goes to a distant country. Everything that looks good, that looks shiny and bright and self-indulgent and desirable and pleasurable and satisfying is his until the money runs out. It's always that way. About the time his money runs out, verse 14, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. And let me talk to you just a moment about that, because we don't really know about great famines. Most of us have no idea. Oh, we've been hungry. Maybe we've missed a meal. Maybe we've had to eat ramen noodles for a season. But in that day, when a great famine struck, there was no outside communications. There was no Red Cross. There was no telethons. There was no way for a world to know what was going on, and there was no transportation system, even if they did know what was going on. There was no hope. When a great famine hit, there was no hope. Here's what a great famine meant in that day, and there are accounts of this in our history 2,000 years ago. You can see this. When a great famine hit, there was unbelievable amounts of murder, thievery, bodies left outside to rot in the streets, children being sold into slavery. There is cannibalism. There are parents eating their children. Jesus' listeners knew of such things. So when Jesus tells the story and he says this boy took his money and he wasted it on wild living, and then when he blew all of his money, a great famine hit, they're saying, oh my, oh my. Verse 15, he persuades a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. Let's pause just a moment, because I want you to think, why doesn't he go home? Why doesn't he go home? He doesn't want to. I mean, it takes him getting to the point of death, literally, because he knows something that you don't know and that I don't know. He knows what was waiting for him if he returned home. When a Jewish boy squandered his inheritance among the Gentiles, was a new learning for me this week. When a Jewish boy squandered his inheritance among the Gentiles, if he dared to try to return home, the entire community would gather upon his return. Now, I want you to remember the Jews were a very visual culture, right? Very visual culture. So they would meet the young prodigal at the gate, all of the townspeople, and they would have with them a piece of pottery. And as a symbol of how destructive he had been, how he had broken his relationships with that community, how he had broken his family apart, how he had broken his father's heart, the whole town would judge the son with a very dramatic gesture. Think about it. I want you to get this. The entire community would gather together. This boy knows this. When that boy would try to come home, they would take a pot as a symbol of his life, and then they would break it. They would say, "Hold, you stop there." And they would say, "This is you. This is you. You have broken your father's heart. You have broken the reputation in our community. You have broken everything we stand for. You are not allowed to be here." That's what they would do. This boy knows. He's made a bad bed, but he is having to lie in it. This is the brokenness you have caused to our community. You have broken everything that is good. You have broken trust. You have broken community. You have broken the heart of your precious father, and the damage is beyond repair. So let this be a symbol of your brokenness. Let these broken pieces remind you of your broken life. You will never be whole. You are not welcome. You are not family, and you are cut off. In fact, they called this ceremony, this had a name to it. It was called kizaza. Kizaza, which is Hebrew for cutting off. Say that with me, please. Kizaza. Some of us have felt that kind of brokenness, haven't we, where we thought we were so broken. We're so broken. Well, this boy knows what's waiting for him. If he tries to come home, that's why he stays away. Even when the famine, he doesn't go home. He can't. And now he's found himself working for a Gentile. He's starving to death. He's eating pig slop that's not fit for human consumption. He's dying. He is dying. And he finally thinks, if I've got to go through Kazaza, at least I'm going to try to go home to my dad. I'm going to try. Verse 17. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father, and I will say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father. Let's hold that. So he returned home to his father. This is better than dying, he thinks. Maybe he'll be shown something. Maybe he'll be able to live as a servant. He'll never be his father's son. And he has this speech in his mind. Father, I'm not worthy to be your son. I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you. But would you please let me just be as a servant? He's practicing this. He's going home. He's skinny, he's hungry, and he's practicing these words. And he's bracing himself because he knows what's coming. Verse 20, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Now the boy had rehearsed his coming home, but there's one thing he had not counted on, and that's that the old man would be standing at the gate of his home, looking out across the horizon, like he had probably looked every day, just hoping he would see his son. You ever found people that you really know, you just recognize their walk? My boys, I don't have to, when they played football, I didn't have to see a jersey number. I could tell by their gait. I could tell by their gait which one they were. That's Ray. That's Ethan. In the distance, he can't make out the face. But he sees the gait, the walk. And he knows, that's my son. Verse 20, continuing. While he's still a long way off, his father saw him, and filled with love and compassion. Oh gosh, this is one of the biggest verses. This is Jesus explaining what our God is like. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Now, when Jesus tells this part of the story to that group of people listening to him, those sinners sitting there, they would begin to do what I've done all week. They would begin to cry. Because they never thought about a father running to them. They never thought about God running to them. The scripture says the father ran. And Jesus uses the technical term in this story to describe what the father did. It was normally reserved just for athletic contest. Literally, the idea is the father raced. The father sprinted. Picture this, an older man sprinting. Now, in the Middle East, understand the patriarch of the family, a man of great dignity and great authority, a man dressed in elaborate robes, always walks in a slow, dignified fashion. He never runs. Strong men in control, they don't run. For this father to run would mean he would have to gather up the edges of his robe so he didn't trip over them. And as he is running, he would be showing his naked legs in public. That was something that we don't have a problem with. They would have a huge problem with that. It was shameful. It was humiliating. A little boy might run and his legs might show, but a father, a grown man, a man in at least his 50s or 60s, maybe a slave would run from time to time, But a father would not run. This father runs. Why? Learning, new learning. He can't stop thinking about his broken son. And if the village gets to my son first, if the village gets to my son first, it will mean kazaza. It will mean brokenness. It will mean shame. It will mean humiliation. And that might just do him in. That might crush his heart. That might crush his spirit. I might really lose him forever. I can't let that happen. I can't let that happen. I will not let that happen. So the old man runs to get there before they have kazazan break it into a million pieces and say, "You're history." He runs. He runs. Filled with compassion, taking on the humiliation that should by all rights have fallen on the prodigal boy. But the father doesn't care. It's on him. It's on him. Of all the twists of this remarkable story that has amazed the human race for 2,000 years, it is this one thing. The father does what no father would have done in that day. The father runs because that father never stopped loving that boy. There was never 1 second he stopped loving him. There was never in that boy's darkest moment the father loved him. 100% perfect. The father loved him because this is a picture of God's love. God never has stopped loving you. Some of us have found ourselves far way off. We have found ourselves lost. We have found ourselves in big fat messes. We said we don't know what we're going to do. And we have imagined that somehow God is mad. He is angry. And we don't know. He is at the gate. And he is just looking for us to turn so he can run to us and he can pick us up and he can embrace us. He does not want society to hurt us. He does not want them to beat us down anymore. He wants to put his arms around us and protect us. That's what he wants to do. Jesus is telling a story and they are stunned. They are stunned. This is not the story of the prodigal son. This is the story of a wonderful father, a father who runs to reach us when we are at our weakest and worst place. Jesus said, this is what God is like. God is so filled with compassion for you, whatever distant country you have been in, that when you take one step towards him, he picks up his robes and he runs to you. He runs to you. He gets there in verse 21. The son says to him, "Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son." The father gets to his boy, and the boy starts into his speech about how he's going to try to earn back some place in the family, or maybe as a servant. That's the best he can hope for. He's going to earn his way back into the family. But the father just hushes him. He just hushes him. Hushes him. And won't let him go on any farther. And this is what the father says. His father says to the servants, he turns. The servants have followed him out. And he says, "Quick," verse 22, "bring the finest robe in the house." Obviously, this boy's clothes are tattered and they're torn and they smell. And he's just in bad shape. And he wants to quickly cover this young man. He says, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house. Put it on him." And then he says, "Get a ring for his finger." What would that mean? He's my son. He belongs to me. "And kill the calf that we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found." So the party began. Jesus tells the story. People are just stunned. The sinners are like, "Oh my stars, this is amazing." The Pharisees are mad that they're hearing this story about a father that loved a son so much. Bring out the best robe, the most expensive ring, the finest shoes, kill the fatted calf. There's not going to be kazaza for my son. Brokenness does not get the last word. Love gets the last word. There's going to be dancing and feasting, and we're going to have a party, and it's going to be wonderful because my son who was lost is now found. He was dead, now he's come back alive. This is a big deal. There is no distance you can travel from God that there isn't joyous restoration upon your return. Some of you have been far away. Some of you think you've been down the road too far. There's no distance you can travel that your turning to God would not lead to joyous restoration. I just want to pause just for a moment and ask you, for those of you who feel like you're far away, why don't you come home? You found something better? You found somebody that would accept you and love you and embrace you and protect you and care for you and defend you and fight for you and give his very best for you. You know a better deal? I don't know a better deal. Why don't you say today, I was lost. I don't want to be lost. I want to run to him. He's running to me. I want to run to him because that's where I'm going to find life. Maybe you'd say, Ray, I've been selfish. I've slept around. I've cheated. I've stolen. I've committed crimes. I've been through an ugly divorce or 2 or 3 or 4. I've been involved in a lifestyle that you think would make everybody in the room blush. You can come home. You can come home. But there's a twist in the story. One more twist. Jesus is still telling the story. Been great if it ended right there, but it doesn't. Now he's going to say what religious people are like. He's going to show them themselves up close and personal. And for any of you who have a tendency, all of us are guilty, to be a little too religious sometimes. When I use religious, I'm talking about that kind of think we're better than other people. Watch what happens. Verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants, what's going on? Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry, and he wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. This is the father. This is the love of the father. The father comes out and begs him. But he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. Let me give you a little background on who this elder brother is. As the oldest son in a party atmosphere like this is what normally would happen. The elder brother would have had the formal responsibility of basically serving people, being kind of the one who took care of the party, made sure people's wine glasses were filled, made sure that they had what they needed. The father would be seated in a place of respect as the father of the family. The older brother would kind of be taking all of this on and doing it as a picture of him as the older brother, as the one who has responsibility in the family. But when the younger son heard his dad, all the resentment inside, he wrote him off, and now he's not participating. Interesting to me, when the younger son heard his dad, he did it privately. You know, he went to his father privately, and he said, I want my money and I want to leave. But here the older son deliberately chooses to expose his father to public humiliation. They are having a fight. The older son is saying horrible things to the father in earshot of the party. And the whole village sees it. See, it's different to us, but to Jesus' listeners, the older son is insulting his father more openly, more defiantly, more cruelly than the younger son would ever have dreamt of doing. Religion is like that sometimes. The father comes out and he pleads with his son. Now, this is really unusual in and of itself. Fathers, they wouldn't do this. Fathers wouldn't plead. Strange thing. The boy's resentment is so deep. Did you know this about resentment? It's kind of fun when you have trouble with resentment. I resent her. I resent him. And you just kind of hold it inside. As you hold it inside, it feels good for a season. You kind of like it. But then it kills you. This boy has been eating resentment and is killing him. I read this past week about resentment. There's a method of killing wolves in the far north where never heard of this before, but the hunter will take a clump of meat and impale it on a knife, and then he will leave the knife there. A wolf will come along and he will start devouring the meat and eating it greedily. When it gets close to the knife, the wolf will begin to prick its own tongue. But because of the cold, and because the wolf is in such a frenzy over its greed for food and the taste of blood, it doesn't realize that it is actually eating its own blood. And it will go on and on and on until it cuts itself so badly it bleeds to death. The wolf will have died by its own appetite for its own blood. Resentment works that way. You're at the knife and you start feeding on it, and you know your sense of self-righteous superiority, and then your soul starts bleeding to death. His father says to him, look, dear son. You know, this is still a picture of God. This father is a picture of God. Jesus telling this story, look, dear son, You have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. It's shocking to Jesus' listeners that the Father says this, my son. It's even more tender than you know. The Greek word for son normally used would be huios, but Jesus uses the word teknon. He is saying literally, my child, my little one, my child, my little one. It'd be like with Ray, he's 30 years old and I'm his dad, but it'd be like me saying, my child, my little one. Oh, you've been with me your whole life. You've been with me your whole life. This Father loves him. You're always at home with me, and everything I have is yours, everything. Now remember, the younger son did take his share. Everything is left is going to be the older son's. And he probably was ticked off because the father, by killing the fattened calf, that would have been something, if the father died, that would have been something that would have belonged to him. But before the eyes of the village, the eyes of the watching world, there's a father who's taken upon himself pain and shame and humiliation. And here is this defiant older brother. My son, do you not realize to live at home with me, to get to exchange love with me, to share all things with me, to walk together through life? These are the greatest gifts I have. They are so much more valuable than stuff. We get to do life together. I thought you knew that's my greatest desire. It's not the money, it's not the clothes, it's not the ring, it's not the calf, it's me. If living at home with me is not enough, then all the parties that you'll ever go to and all the property in the world you may ever obtain will not satisfy you. Because you're going to be eaten up with resentment about your young brother. You're going to be eaten up with that. The Father is infinitely gracious, and this spoke to me. The Father is infinitely gracious to the religious elder brother, and yet He is infinitely firm. He is gracious, but He is firm. He's not apologizing, and He's not stopping the party. And that's what God is like. When we act self-righteous and we're religious, I see God saying to us, oh, little one, my beloved son, don't you know I appreciate all that you've done? I appreciate that you've been with me. But I'm not stopping the party for the one who has trashed his life. I'm not stopping the party. Won't you join me in the celebration? The elder son is not going to be given power. He can plead, he can do anything, but not given power. This brother of yours was lost and he is found. I love the way he says that. This brother of yours. You remember the elder brother? He called him this son of yours. He's not my brother. This son of yours, Dad, he's wasted all of that he had doing all these bad things. Even said he'd been with prostitutes. The text never implies that that was a part of it. You don't know. I don't know why he said that, because people's minds go crazy places, I guess. But when the Father speaks, he says, this brother of yours, this brother of yours, this brother of yours was lost, and now he's found. And then there's silence. The Father looks into the eyes of the older brother, and what does he see? Does he see anger? Does he see confusion? Does he see sorrow? Now back to the audience that day. All of Jesus' listeners stand in rapt silence of this extraordinary story of one son who was lost and came home, another son who stayed home and was lost even more, and they're just wondering, how's it going to end? What's going to happen next? But then Jesus stops. Last verse, verse 32. The Father says, we had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And everybody's dying to know, what does the elder brother do? And Jesus walks away. How did it end? Did he say, I will never welcome somebody like that because he doesn't fit into the plan the way I understand it, so I don't care your heart for him, he will never be in my family? Or does he fall on his knees? Does he fall on his knees? Is his hard heart broken? Does he begin to weep? Does he begin to get the heart of the Father? Does he beg his dad to forgive him? Does he go into the house and there see the skinny, wasted figure of his younger brother? We don't know. And you know why we don't know? It's not that Jesus couldn't think of an ending. It's because Jesus says, you decide the ending. Because you're the older brother sometimes. You're the older brother. What you going to do? Jesus says, I've given you the heart of the Father. The heart of the Father, he runs to people who are away from him, who want to come home. What are you going to do? By being the in crowd, by being the one who's already at home, what are you going to do? Y'all, it's a word to our church. Are we going to throw parties for sinners when they come home? Are we going to rejoice when people who've been far away and when they get it and they say, you know what, I want to come home. I want to come home. Or are we going to cross our arms and say, some people just messed it up too bad. We're not going to have a place for them. This church can never become a museum for saints. We need to be a hospital where people, regardless of how wrecked and ruined their lives are, can learn about a Father who runs towards them to embrace them, to love them, to save them. We get to decide. Would you bow your heads, please? Oh, Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this moment. I thank you for this precious story. A story not strictly about a prodigal son, not strictly about an elder brother, but more than anything about your great loving heart that says to us, you love us. At our worst moments, you love us perfectly. And all you want to see from us is just a turning to you to find out if you're there. And you'll run to us and embrace us. For that person who's wasted their life, feels like they have been in a far country starving to death. Oh God, let them see today they can go from being lost to being found. They really can go from feeling outside of the family to being in the family of God today. And then, Father, for anybody here that has even a little bit of a resentment in their spirit towards people who are maybe haven't lived the way they've lived, who maybe feel any kind of resistance to people being embraced by you, all people embraced by you. Help them know that the spirit they possess is the spirit of the older brother. And they've got to make a decision. And they can harden their heart to the people that you are inviting in, or they can fall on their knees and say, oh God, I want to be a part of what you're a part of. Help us in Jesus' name.